Next from Chicago, we talk to Republican political analyst Chris Robling. We get his thoughts on the presidential election, whether progress will ever be made in the stalemate between Governor Rauner and Speaker Madigan, and who he believes among potential Illinois gubernatorial candidates will run for the 2018 election. This runs about 35 minutes.
Robling, thanks for joining us again on the Illinois Channel.
Great to be with you, Terry.
For those who may not remember, you are a Republican analyst. You have no aspirations of being nonpartisan. You are purely a partisan, but nonetheless, you are a keen observer of the political landscape. And as we sit here in the middle of October, with the election now less than a month away, we wanted to get your ideas on some of the things that are happening both at the federal and state level, and with the understanding that I know of you, that you will give your advice, and it may be critical of Republicans as well as Democrats. But let's start with, of course, the screwiest election, presidential election, I would say, in our lifetime. And not to disparage either candidate, but these are both widely unliked people. Mm-hmm. Many people would, if we had none of the above, it's a time when that would win the election.
Right.
What is your take on what's happening at this election, and what is your expectation of how it might turn out?
Well, I think right now Hillary Clinton has the advantage. She's completely pulled together in terms of her campaign organization, in terms of her messaging, in terms of her outreach to specific constituent groups. And I think that she has, by the standards of her campaign, I think she's been running a pretty decent campaign. I think that we're having this conversation just 48 hours after Paul Ryan announced to the members of the Republican members of the United States House of Representatives that he would no longer campaign with or defend Mr. Trump, and instead he would devote his time to maintaining majorities in the Senate and the House. And that has caused, in the last 48 hours, a very public, very visible, I would say, salient breach between the candidate for president, Donald Trump, and the Republican Party. Now, that's not to say every Republican official is verboten over at the Trump campaign, nor is it to say that the Trump campaign doesn't have relations with a lot of folks. But at a certain level, while the RNC is still connected to the Trump campaign, Paul Ryan backing off the Trump campaign has put that campaign into a place that no other American presidential campaign, certainly in memory, I don't think anyone has ever been so inchoate with respect to its party support. And so right now you have to say, well, it looks like Hillary is better organized. On the other hand...
now, let me interject. And Ben Carson, who is a big fan of Trump and has been a spokesman for him, a surrogate, but he said Paul Ryan, and I want to get in other words, what's your take on the Ryan strategy, that Paul Ryan, House Speaker, is just being pragmatic. He has to ensure as much as he can that he maintains control of the House, and given the lewd comments that we heard coming from Trump, that he wants to have a firewall there to say, you run your campaign, I'm going to be trying to manage the House campaign.
Far be it from me, to sort of criticize Paul Ryan or Trump. I mean, these guys are doing what they think is in their own best interests, and that's the way it's always going to be. But normally, the best interest of the Republican Speaker of the House is to line up with the Republican presidential candidate. In fact, historically, Ryan has done more issue work this year with the explicit purpose of providing an issue framework for whoever the candidate was. So it could have been Ted Cruz, it could have been Ben Carson, Dr. Carson, Carly Fiorina, whoever. He set up an entire agenda in the United States House of Representatives Republican caucus for the benefit of the Republican presidential candidate. Turns out he gets Donald Trump. Donald Trump is so far removed from normal Republican agendas or objectives that the Ryan plan hasn't been of much use to Trump. So this is all going back to illustrate your point that this is a very unusual election. We're in sort of uncharted territory. I know that the Democrats are not counting Donald Trump out. I think that means the Republicans should not count Donald Trump out. On the other hand, if you were a wagering person, you'd have to say, I'll put my dollar on Hillary Clinton as of today.
One of the things that Trump has done, which I think is interesting, is that he has made an explicit outreach to minorities, especially the black voters. As he would say, what have you got to lose, given the record of the Democratic Party? What's your take on that as a strategy?
I think it's an important step for him to take. I think it's a good step. I think that the Democrats will always criticize anything that Republicans do in any minority community because they don't want the competition. But by the very same token, for the community at stake, the competition is beneficial. Because if the Democrats can say there is no place for community X or Y or Z to go, then why be particularly responsive? And if the Republicans show up and say, we might have something for you. For instance, I think that it's more of a, what have you got to lose? I do think that Trump has tried to cobble together an agenda. And part of that is law and order. Part of that is school choice, which is a very big issue in many minority communities. Part of that is his unrelenting focus on jobs and job creation and reevaluating the blandishments of sort of free trade, which people have said for years would be fair as well as free. But he finds, and this is a place where he's very far removed from traditional Republicanism, he finds it to have been unfair. Okay, and he finds it to have been unfair to the extent that ultimately the minority communities have been detrimented by these free trade pacts.
And he would say the blue-collar worker as well.
That's right. And so there's been sort of the dominoes falling in the economy, which have most acutely injured the African-American community. So I think that Trump was onto something. I'm not saying he's going to get a tremendous share of the black vote or the Hispanic vote, obviously. But I think it's better for him to try, and it's better for all Republicans to try, and that's something Republican people should be doing.
I found it interesting, not just relative to Trump, but just that to the extent that maybe the Republican Party historically should have been doing more of that. A number of Republicans, Aaron Schock, formerly, when he was first elected, it was a surprise to the Illinois House. And he said, I went after the black vote because he was in what had been for years a Democratic seat. He was a #1 target of the Democrats to get him out of there when he ran for re-election. But in the 2 years from his first election to the second, he increased his black vote from 5% to 20%. And at a state convention where he talked about this, he said a number of black voters would say, you're the first Republican to even ask for my vote in 25 years. Has that, would you say, is that an indictment of the policies of the Republican Party, that they really too much have said, well, we're not going to get the black vote, so let's not even go after it?
Yes, I think it is. I think it is an indictment of the leadership of the Republican Party. I think that we have to be a party for all neighborhoods, for all precincts in Illinois, for all neighborhoods in America. And that means we've got to be sensitive to the needs of those neighborhoods and those precincts. And we've got to be present. And, we were present in a different way. It's ancient history now, but we used to have a system where there was a Republican state representative in every community of Illinois. That's been gone for now almost 40, 50 years, since 1983 or 4 or something. And so we don't have that necessary connection. We don't have that link. And I think that has certainly done us no favors. I'll also point out that in Illinois, for decades and decades, up until I would say the post-George Ryan era, Republican statewide candidates have understood very well that if they're not getting sort of 20, 23, 26% in the black community, they have a very hard time getting elected statewide. So, for instance, Jim Thompson, Chuck Percy, Jim Thompson, former governor, was governor for 14 years. Chuck Percy was a senator for 18 years. Governor Jim Edgar, who also served as Secretary of State, so he had about 16 years at the pinnacle of state office. All of those three, and many others, would spend enough time in the African American communities and meet enough people to get their fair share. And unfortunately, since Jim Edgar, the sort of commitment to that sort of statewide campaigning has been a little spongy. I think Mark Kirk is doing it, but we'll see what those results are.
And before, I don't want to, we'll move away from the minority thing, but the last thing I said, what would the argument be? Because the Republican Party, I think, hasn't made a proactive effort to go after the black vote, what would you say as someone who's very familiar with the Republican Party? What's the argument? What would be the saleables to the black community?
Well, I think that, first of all, to get to the what do you have to lose, almost all of the public sector institutions that the Democratic majority have pushed into the African American community are failing or have failed. Now, that's not to say that there aren't bright spots, it's not to say that there aren't dedicated people, good people doing good things, and God bless every one of them. But the truth is, if you look at the Chicago Public Schools, in general, the Chicago Public Schools fails to do its job. And if you look at the sort of job creation efforts in the state of Illinois, I think you're going to find that notwithstanding many hundreds of millions of dollars spent on economic development, et cetera, we're not seeing any impact of that on the south side of the city of Chicago, the west side of the city of Chicago. But that then gets you to the family issue, which is central to, I think, the welfare of the entire community, but also then the violence issue. And violence gets you to gun violence. And gun violence gets you to terrible murders, terrible loss of life, terrible injuries, et cetera. So I think that a fresh look I believe the Republicans come in and say, government is not going to solve all of your problems. We've got to address the issues that are publicly recognizable in your community. For instance, we trust African American parents to know where is best for their kid to go to school. And so like in Indiana, like in Florida, like in Wisconsin, we're going to give you a voucher. You choose where to. You are absolutely freed from the Chicago public school system, which we all know what that has been and how long it has been that. So you have to liberate all of those parents and express confidence. And charter schools, I think, are a good middle step.
Have you talked to members of the black community? I mean, how does that resonate to school choice?
I think I think it is the civil rights issue of the 21st century. I think that folks, whether they're in Philadelphia, and this has been a lot of traction for Donald Trump. Philadelphia, LA, Minneapolis, Houston, wherever you go, people are very disappointed with public employee union-dominated school systems that, in fact, as we see here in Chicago, with great pain and suffering and regret, are more interested in benefits for the members of the union, both while working and in retirement, than they are with the educational results of the institution. Those come second, third, fourth, who knows where, if at all.
Turning to this election, we have almost like surrogate battles it kind of reminds me of the Cold War, when Russia and America couldn't afford to go to war directly, so we had these surrogate battles like Vietnam and other places. We have that between Governor Rauner and Speaker Madigan, and this power struggle that's going on. And then, of course, the governor's putting something like $20 million into the Republican Party, which therefore, for the first time in recent memory, would have more money than the Democrats.
Yeah.
Some of the races, what do you expect? We could look at some of the races. There's Senator Gary Forby down in Southern Illinois. We got Brandon Phelps, House member, also down in that district. Mm-hmm. These are conservative, tend to be conservative-ish for mm-hmm. Democrats, mm-hmm.
Members.
But they're kind of, I call them the Harry Truman Democratic Party. You know, mm-hmm. they're strong on defense, God-fearing, good for guns, hunters, but they're union guys. I mean, that's going back to the 1950 Democratic Party. They're a legacy, I think, that area of that voting pattern. Have you followed those races, and to what extent do you think they might be competitive?
Quite honestly, I don't follow them individually. I think that there is greater competition. I think it's a very big price tag for greater competition. I hope that it results primarily in, or not primarily, but I think that one of its results ought to be the re-election of Mark Kirk, if at all possible, because I've got a huge problem with Tammy Duckworth, and I think that Mark Kirk is a good vote on national security, defense, sometimes on fiscal issues, and therefore, and most importantly, he would vote to organize the Senate with the Republicans, and we might desperately need that vote to prevent Hillary Clinton or even possibly Donald Trump from putting strange people on the Supreme Court. So I think you've got this Kirk thing, you've got the Leslie Munger thing. Leslie Munger and Susana Mendoza are running against each other for controller, which isn't much of a position, but it is a statewide office, and it's essentially the check writing, bill paying function that was peeled out of the Treasurer's office at the time of the 1970s Constitution. So that's not really.
How do you see that race going?
Well, I think that it's not. Most people are not walking around sort of wondering about who's going to be the controller in January. I think that on the other hand, Madigan is absolutely dedicated, and Mendoza is Madigan's tool in this race, whereas Munger is a very bright, very self-possessed, very experienced and capable former executive in consumer products with MBA and a lot of real-world experience at the multi-billion-dollar level. Munger has stood up to Rauner. So Rauner actually got her appointed. It's a long story. But anyway, Rauner put her in there, and she's been independent of Rauner to some extent. To some extent, she depends on Rauner.
Right.
But she's shown streaks of independence, and she's taken actions that they haven't liked, et cetera, et cetera. Mendoza is a wind-up doll for Mike Madigan. She will only do what Madigan wants. And she has not taken a position in the campaign at odds with Madigan or countenance to any conversation about the true fiscal insolvency, okay? The bankruptcy. I mean, we are bankrupt. We are bankrupt. We cannot pay our bills. The Comptroller's Office is able to pay about $100 million in bills, I think, a day or a week, whereas the unpaid bill stack was sort of $8 billion at the beginning of the year, and it's inching upwards. So we've got all these unpaid bills. We've got only so many that we can pay, and if we weren't a state, we would be bankrupt because we would face reorganization. And Madigan doesn't want that. And that gets us into the whole Madigan issue. So down at the state rep level, I think that, as a Republican, I hope all those races come in. As an Illinoisan or as a political person, just sort of seeing them from afar, I think that those incumbents are strong. They're incumbents for a reason. So it's going to take a lot at the local level to overcome the advantage of incumbency.
On the Mark Kirk race,
yes.
The Republicans, there are a lot of Republicans who bandy about a phrase, rhino, that they're Republicans in name only. I don't hear Democrats having a corresponding phraseology. Or is ideology a problem in the Republican Party? I mean, do we have too many ideologues in the Republican Party who are going to say, unless you're with me on the entire laundry list of my policy views, you're not good enough to be a Republican?
Notwithstanding the split between, say, Speaker Paul Ryan and Donald Trump, the presidential candidate, notwithstanding that, my answer to you is no, we don't have too much, and here's why. People get into the Republican Party because they believe something. People get into the Democratic Party. I was raised a Democrat. My grandfather was a Democratic congressman from Central Illinois, so I have a lot of reverence for the Democratic Party. It's not, preternatural anti-Democratic Party-ism, okay? But the Democratic Party, people join typically because they want something. The Republican Party, people join because they believe something, okay? So they believe things in a whole variety of contexts, and outsiders or critics or cynics might say, oh, that's ideology. Well, fine. What's wrong with ideology? I mean, if we don't have an ideology in 1760, do we ever turn into the United States of America? Who knows? So there are people with beliefs. Now, that's not to say that there aren't people who join the Republican to get something or that there aren't people in the Democratic because they believe something. But generally speaking, the more beliefs, the better. What has happened, however, I think in the last few years, is that we have witnessed a polarization. And the polarization, I think, is based mainly because of the debt vortex, which is taking us all down the drain. The $19 trillion, $20 trillion of national debt, and here in Illinois, our insolvency or bankruptcy, whatever you want to call it. So in light of pretty stark fiscal realities, okay, we're stuck with folks who, on the Democratic side, because they work for the public employee unions, are saying nothing is wrong, everything is fine, let's just keep raising taxes. On the Republican side, you have people saying these are serious issues and we're going to have to address them. And the folks in the Republican Party who are saying, well, let's take care of the public employees, or let's go slow on addressing those issues. That's where the immediacy of the vortex comes up against the realities of the politics, and sometimes there are clashes. I personally believe that means we're a much more intellectually vital and vibrant and lively
But do
organization.
people cut off their nose to spite their face? Do they say,
Occasionally,
I'm
yes.
not going to vote for Mark Kirk because
Yes.
whatever. There's some
conservatives-
policy position that he's for and I'm against. But as you noted, if you're going to want to have Republican
Yeah.
policy, first of all, no one's ever going to believe exactly the same
Right.
across any part.
Right.
You're going to have to organize the Congress under the majority because the majority rules.
So conservatives are very upset with Mark Kirk. They understood 6 years ago that he was a moderate Republican. It turns out they voted for him, or they helped him to some extent, some did. And it turns out he was a liberal Republican. He's not a moderate Republican, he's a liberal Republican. I am a conservative who stood up for Mark Kirk 6 years ago, and I'm very upset about many of his votes. But that doesn't change my support for him getting reelected. Here's why. We have to have 51 votes. Because I'm looking at a situation where it's likely Hillary wins and the president of the Senate becomes Tim Kaine, right? And so now, if the Democrats have 50 votes plus Tim Kaine, they run the Senate. We need, therefore, 50. 50 is not enough for us. We need 51. Now, if Donald Trump gets elected and Mike Pence becomes the president of the Senate, so much the better. But in the meantime, we need 51. And I don't think anybody should be frivolous about Mark Kirk, even though he's taken some real stinkers of votes. I mean, really awful. But I'm overlooking those for the greater good.
Now, going back, let's try Madigan and Speaker Madigan and the Governor Rauner. Rauner, again, is a governor unlike we've ever seen before,
Yeah.
never held public office,
Right.
has somewhere, money is no object to him. He has enough personal wealth. And we will see if he is successful in picking up any additional House or Senate seats. I think John Sullivan, who's retiring, a Democrat, conservative Democrat from the Quincy area, that race is expected to go to the Republicans.
Right.
We'll see if there's any sizable movement. What is your expectation in this long 2-year stalemate that we've had between the governor and Speaker Madigan? Do you imagine anything's going to change after the election?
Frankly, if I was Governor Rauner, and not that he's asked me, but I'm sure he's an avid watcher of your program, I would declare, I would say I'm starting with a completely clean slate. Let's start with a clean slate. The Speaker and I have disagreed over the last couple of years. I'm going to work with him as much as I can. And I think people around the state of Illinois want to know that Rauner is trying to generate some results for them. And my view, or my opinion, worth exactly what you're paying for it, but my opinion after this sort of 18, well, it's more like 14, 16 months since June of 2015, is that I haven't heard a lot from Governor Rauner about what he's fighting for, nor do I see something that Governor Rauner is going to be able to seize and then proclaim victory. And so it's a terrible disaster fiscally, as Leslie Munger will tell you, and as she's saying to people all over the state, because we're operating without a budget. Most of our spending has been legally authorized by sort of pre-existing legal arrangements or consent agreements that have been entered into between public employee unions and the state in court with a neutral arbiter, the judge. So we're kind of a zombie state. We had no budget. We're insolvent. We're bankrupt. There's no conceivable way we're going to meet our unfunded obligations. Okay, so and yet we're operating. That makes us a zombie. So I think Governor Rauner needs a new set of messages about this, and he has a new set of he needs a new set of priorities, and he needs a new set of achievable goals. The achievement of which, right, will then be turned around and presented back to the voters of Illinois to illustrate this is what you get with a Bruce Rauner. Now, I say this with absolutely zero idea of whether he wants to run for re-election or not. Maybe he wants to walk away. That's fine. indebted to him for spending 4 years, 5 years doing this work for the good people of the state of Illinois. But if he wants to stay, then I really underline what I'm saying. Even if he wants to go, I think he should change tactics significantly, because I don't see anything that's going on right now leading to an identifiable victory, okay? I see it leading to an identifiable stalemate. And in that stalemate, the truth is the Democrats, with their advantage on the way the districts are drawn and campaigning and stuff like that, we might see some pickups, and I hope that we do, and we certainly have got some good people working on it. But the Democrats tend to be better at getting their message out than we do, sorry to say. And so I'm not sure that without a change in tactics, he's going to have much to present back to the voters.
Let's jump to next year.
Yes.
You're going to have certain people starting to line up to run for governor
Yes.
in 2 years. I mean, the election will be here 2 years from next month. Is Rauner good for the Republican Party? I mean, is he damaging the brand?
No.
Is he helping?
No. I think that Rauner is the best thing that happened to us. I mean, obviously, I would say, but I believe it to be true that Rauner is the best thing that happened to us in 25 years. I think that.
And why is that?
Because he's a very capable person. He's got a lot of means at his disposal. He had the personal determination and dedication. I mean, there aren't a lot of people, at his station in life, right, who are saying, I'm going to put aside all that I've done, that I've enjoyed. I'm going to put aside, my family, who I love very dearly, and, travel and all of the things that I could do at this moment in my life. And I'm going to get down into the weeds of Onarga, Illinois, and start arguing about, pensions and reform measures and Illinois taxes. And who wants to do that if you've got hundreds of millions of dollars and a beautiful wife and all these places to go? Okay, but he did, and he does, and I thank him for it, and I'm very appreciative. Also, in addition to that, I think that he crystallized the difference between the statist Madigan, the Madiganistan, which is, the state is everything, and the public employee unions come over, with the trial lawyers and the property tax lawyers. I mean, it's a very specific coalition that Madigan runs. And then the Republicans, I think, after Ryan, who was a disaster, I mean, that was kind of a smoke bomb or a stink bomb or whatever you want to call it, and going off to prison, who were the Republicans? What did they stand for? And who spoke for them? We didn't have a visible, identifiable, cognizable leader. And I think that that's who Rauner has become. And Rauner has appropriately told the people the truth. And it's something they would never hear in 100 million years from Mike Madigan or any of his lieutenants, or for that matter, my friend John Carlton, who's the greatest guy in the world. But he's not going to tell people what's really going on. What's really going on is what you hear from Bruce and what you hear from Leslie, and that is we're insolvent, technically we're bankrupt, and we have no way of funding our unfunded obligations. And we've got to keep this state somehow. We've got to get it back to being competitive so that we're not going to lose our jobs and have the fiscal vortex turn into a societal or an economic vortex, which turns into a societal, because we're depopulating. We're depopulating. And that's because of Democratic policies, it's because of Democratic intransigence, because the public employee unions won't let the Democrats do anything about what's going on. And so I think without Rauner, we would be on a shorter road to ruin.
Do you have any thoughts, just briefly, the two candidates that might run? Some people say Governor Quinn, there's speculation whether he'll try to go again, and then we have Chris Kennedy, son of Robert Anetho, who's a businessman here in Chicago.
Yeah, I mean, I know Chris Kennedy less than that amount, but my impression is he was not going to, I don't think he's ever going to take that step. I think he's got so many obligations to his brothers, sisters, cousins, and the Kennedy Trust and all of the Renato real estate investments and things like that. I just don't know in that structure who you turn that over to. And it might be somebody, and I could be wrong, but I think Chris Kennedy, dedicated public servant, served as chairman of the board of this University of Illinois, great guy. I don't think that he is going to run. I think that Pat Quinn would love to run. I think Pat Quinn would love to beat Bruce Rauner and sort of, turn about his fair play. And so I know that he's out there nibbling around, and he'll be giving a speech at the City Club next week or this week, or it's coming up. And so he's obviously keeping an eye on things. But I'm not sure that anybody wants to, with all respect to Pat, who's had a long and illustrious career, I don't think people want to go backward. And I think that is one of the problems facing Hillary. Get back to the presidential real quick. The story this year, right now, seems to be Trump is crazy, and Trump walks in on the contestants of his beauty pageant and all these horrible things that Trump has done, and they are horrible. But that's not the real story. The real story this year is that people are so hesitant to commit to Hillary Clinton. With her resume, with her background, with her level of experience, senator from New York, secretary of state, around the world, all of these negotiations, people are not comfortable with Hillary Clinton. They are so uncomfortable with Hillary Clinton that they've allowed Trump to stay right around here. Now, for a while Trump was there, maybe Trump's here, but he's not here. Right. And if you listen to the pundits in the East Coast or in the West Coast or, from London or wherever, Trump's the one who should be on Elba, the island where Napoleon, they ought to send him to Elba. I mean, that's what they say. But the people of the country are keeping Trump that close. And all of us, the state reps downstate, Governor Rauner, Mark Kirk, all of us have to listen to that. That's a very profound statement that's being made by people. Even if Trump is not over Hillary right now, even if he's a little bit behind, he's in it. And that says people want change, and change is not going back to Pat Quinn.
And in conclusion, obviously I follow politics. I wouldn't be doing this job if I didn't. But people often at the national level will be talking about the demise of the Republican Party. The thing I see is that over the last several years, the Republican Party has picked up any number of state houses. They control the U.S. House with the largest majority since the 1920s. They control the U.S. Senate. The only thing they haven't had of late, to put the cherry on the cake, is the presidency.
That's right.
Whereas I would agree with you. I had a side bet with somebody just because Hillary Clinton as a candidate, policies aside, is such a bad candidate.
Right.
I didn't think the Democratic Party would actually nominate her.
Nor did I.
But I look at where is their bench?
Right.
The Democratic Party, frankly, is the one where I look and say, who else would run but Hillary? And you go on down the line. I mean, Sherwood Brown of Ohio. I mean, you have a bunch of people who have never raised much of a profile, have never achieved anything great, where you look back at the days of Sam Nunn, George Mitchell, these were credible people, Bob Kerrey of Nebraska, credible people who had done things. I guess I'll ask you for your spin on it, but that was my take. And,
sure.
What's your take on the future of the Republican Party, and for that matter, what's your analysis of the National Democratic Party?
Well, I believe the Democratic Party ultimately, like all socialist operations, runs out of other people's money to give away. And it has already, it's well into that. And that's why it's trying desperately. That's why, in the state of Virginia, every felon is now being urged to become a registered voter. I mean, they are reduced to vote fraud. They're reduced to finding people who are not citizens and trying to convert them into voters. Because ultimately, they lost the House, and they lost an entire generation of bright young Democratic lights. And then 2 years later, they lost the Senate, and they lost a generation of bright young Democrats, statewide office holders, wiped out. Okay, and I think those two are actually in pretty decent shape. I might be wrong, but I think that they're probably going to hold as Republican, but we still need to get Kirk over the top just in case. Anyway, you look nationally, and the party is running up against the fact that when fiscally,
the Democratic Party.
The Democratic Party is running up against the fact that when you fiscally serve one constituency, the public employee unions, and then those dependent on government, if that is your raison d'etre, then you're going to come to limits. And that's why Hillary lies about her tax policy. She could take all of the money of all of the billionaires or all of the people on the Forbes 400 or, say whatever you want. The people who are making more than $10 million, you take all of that money and you put it into the federal government, it is going to operate the federal government for about 3 or 4 weeks. It's not a solution. So when she says that rich are going to pay their fair share,
which is never given as what percentage of income would that be?
And nor is there any limit applied to that, but when she says that, she is hiding the fact that if they took all from the rich, they would not be able to fund their spendaholism, and so to fund that spendaholism, she has to raise taxes on the middle class. That's deathly for her and for her campaign. She's not going to say it. I think Trump has been trying to say, hasn't said it as well as he should. So with the Republican Party, just very quickly, people said when Obama was elected, that's the end of the Republican Party. It's gone forever, and we will not see it again, and there will be a new party coming out because Barack Obama has triumphed for once. He's St. George and we're the dragon, and he won. Okay. So obviously that didn't happen because after Obamacare, we get the House, and then we get the Senate, then we get the governorships, 35 governorships. So we're in good shape, and also a huge majority of the state legislators. So we have a big bench. I think that the Trump experience is going to be tough to digest. Quite honestly, the Trump experience is going to give us.
And of course, if he were to be elected, then who knows what that does going forward.
The regular old party structures, the statutory party structures around the country are controlled by regular old Republicans, some of whom are reformers and dedicated to the taxpayer and to limiting government and really delivering for society, others of whom are establishmentarian. Now, all of the establishmentarians need to be kicked out. It's the reformers who should overtake the middle. But I think that Trump as president, I'm not sure how much effect he has on the party because everybody in it are still from before. And I think Trump as loser has zero effect on the Republican Party. So then we'll be back to kind of the moderate versus the conservative fight, or the establishment versus the reformer fight. But I think, I hope that some Trump people who have gotten activated this year, energized, I hope they stick with it.
All right. Chris Robling, we could do more, but time grows short, and we appreciate your time.
Good to be here.
Thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
You're watching the Illinois Channel, an independent nonprofit corporation formed to provide gavel-to-gavel coverage of Illinois state government and other public affairs events taking place across Illinois.